What you're about to hear is not speculation. It's not conspiracy theory. It's not wild conjecture from fringe sources. What you're about to hear is documented history, verifiable facts, published evidence, names, dates, positions, actions, all part of the historical record. And it's a story that should make you very, very angry. Because this is the story of how the Vatican destroyed an honest priest for trying to tell the truth, how a powerful organization buried evidence that threatened their legitimacy, and how 50 years later that evidence remains locked away, hidden from the very people who have a right to see it. This is the story of Father Joaquín María Alonso González, the official historian of Fatima, a scholar of impeccable credentials who spent 20 years documenting the truth about the most famous Marian apparition of the 20th century. And in 1974, 2 years after an Opus Dei bishop took control of Fatima, Father Alonso was stripped of his position. His life's work, 24 volumes, nearly 20,000 pages of documentation, was confiscated and locked away. No explanation was given, no charges were filed, no official reason was ever published. He was simply erased, made to disappear, silenced while still alive. The question we're going to answer here is simple. What did Father Alonso discover that required such desperate suppression? And the answer will shake you. Because what Father Alonso discovered, what he documented, what he published before they could silence him completely, was photographic evidence of one of the most audacious deceptions in Catholic history. Let us begin. Part 1. The Honest Historian, the priest who knew too much. Father Joaquín Alonso arrived at the sanctuary of Fatima in 1954. He was 41 years old. A Spanish Claretian priest, he came with credentials that were absolutely impeccable. This wasn't some devotional writer churning out pious pamphlets. Father Alonso was a serious academic, a trained historian, a rigorous scholar who approached Fatima with the same professional standards you'd expect from any university researcher. The bishops of the area of Fatima trusted him completely. For 12 years, Father Alonso worked as archivist and researcher, building his expertise and documenting every aspect of the Fatima apparitions. Then, in 1966, Bishop João Pereira Venancio made it official. He commissioned Father Alonso to create the definitive critical history of Fatima. Not a summary, not a devotional book. A complete critical edition. Every document, every photograph, every authenticated piece of evidence. The scope was staggering. 24 volumes, approximately 800 pages each, more than 5,000 original documents compiled and analyzed. Nearly 20,000 pages of meticulous scholarship. Father Alonso was given unprecedented access, direct meetings with Sister Lúcia, the last surviving Fatima visionary, complete access to the diocesan archives, authority to examine any document, photograph any piece of evidence related to the apparitions. For 20 years, Father Alonso did exactly what they'd hired him to do. He interviewed Sister Lúcia extensively. He compiled thousands of documents. He published numerous books and scholarly articles. The man was prolific, careful, thorough. And most importantly, he was honest. Too honest, as it turned out. The archive that would change everything. According to sources who worked with Father Alonso during his tenure as official historian, he wasn't just collecting documents. He was building something comprehensive, something that would become the definitive scholarly resource on Fatima for centuries. Every document authenticated and cross-referenced, every photograph analyzed and dated, every testimony evaluated according to rigorous historical standards. And here's the key detail. He was preparing extensive photographic studies, comparative analysis of images taken across different time periods, the kind of forensic examination that would authenticate or raise devastating questions about the identity of people in those photographs. This photographic analysis would become his most important work and his most dangerous. Because when you have access to authenticated photographs from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and you can compare them to photographs from the 1960s and after, well, you might start to notice things. Inconsistencies, differences, details that don't add up. And if you're an honest historian, if you're committed to truth above all else, you document those differences, you investigate them, you compile the evidence, even when that evidence points to something absolutely devastating. The Fuentes interview. December 26, 1957. A meeting took place that would change everything. Father Agustin Fuentes, the postulator for the beatification causes of Francisco and Jacinta Marto, Sister Lucia's fellow visionaries, traveled to Coimbra for an interview with Sister Lúcia. What she told him was apocalyptic. Quote, "Father, the Most Holy Virgin is very sad because no one has paid any attention to her message, neither the good nor the bad. The good continue on their way, but without giving any importance to her message. The devil is in the mood for engaging in a decisive battle against the Blessed Virgin, and the devil knows what it is that offends God the most, and which in a short space of time will gain for him the greatest number of souls. The devil does everything to overcome souls consecrated to God, because in this way the devil will succeed in leaving the souls of the faithful abandoned by their leaders." End quote. Think about what she's saying. Quote, "The devil does everything to overcome souls consecrated to God." End quote. She's warning about diabolical infiltration of the clergy itself. She's saying the faithful will be, quote, "abandoned by their leaders." End quote. These were not the reassuring words Vatican officials wanted from their most famous visionary. This wasn't the approved narrative. This wasn't the message they wanted the world to hear. Sister Lúcia was warning of disaster, warning that the 1960 deadline for revealing the third secret would be catastrophically ignored. The interview caused immediate panic. The Diocese of Leiria Fatima, under mysterious pressure, issued a statement claiming that Father Fuentes had, quote, "misrepresented," end quote, Sister Lucia's words. They tried to bury it, to discredit it, to make it go away. But Father Fuentes stood by his account. He gave sworn testimony. He never retracted a single word. This December 1957 interview was the last authenticated public statement by the real Sister Lúcia dos Santos. Sometime shortly after this interview, something changed. Part 2. The Photographic Evidence. Page 91. Now here's where it gets absolutely critical, and please pay very close attention to this. In 1976, Father Alonso published a book, La Verdad sobre el Secreto de Fatima, The Truth About the Secret of Fatima. This was 2 years after his suppression, 2 years after Bishop Amaral had stripped him of his position and locked away his comprehensive archive. And on page 91 of this book, Father Alonso included something extraordinary, something that may explain why his entire life's work was buried and why he was destroyed. Photographic evidence. On this page, Father Alonso presents 2 photographs side by side. Figure 8 shows Pope Paul VI presenting a woman identified as Lúcia to the crowds at Fatima. Figure 9 shows Sister Lúcia dos Santos, the authenticated Fatima visionary from earlier decades. And then, Father Alonso does something remarkable, something dangerous. He points out the physical differences. The text in his own published book notes that the facial features of the Lúcia in Figure 8 are different from those of Sister Lúcia dos Santos in Figure 9. Specifically, he draws attention to the lips. The Lúcia with Pope Paul has thin lips. The authentic Sister Lúcia dos Santos has full, thick lips. Think about what he's doing here. The official Fatima historian, working with authenticated photographs from the diocesan archives, publishing a comparative analysis that shows, in his own book, under his own name, that the woman being presented as Sister Lúcia has different physical features than the authenticated visionary. He's not speculating. He's not theorizing. He's presenting photographic evidence and saying, quote, "Judge for yourself, dear reader." End quote. Quote, "Los rasgos de la Lúcia de la figura 8 son diferentes de los rasgos de la hermana Lúcia dos Santos en la figura 9. End quote. Quote, "The features of the Lúcia in Figure 8 are different from the features of Sister Lúcia dos Santos in Figure 9. End quote. This is the official historian with access to all authenticated materials, publishing photographic comparison, documenting physical differences in facial structure, in features that don't change with age. Lips don't change from thick to thin as you get older. Bone structure does not reshape itself. These are permanent, identifying characteristics." And he published this in 1976, 2 years after being suppressed, 2 years after Bishop Amaral took away his position and locked away his massive 24-volume archive. Was this page 91 a desperate attempt to get the truth out, a final act of scholarly courage before death could silence him completely? Was he leaving breadcrumbs, evidence that couldn't be completely erased, for future researchers to find? The official Fatima historian published photographic evidence showing different facial features between the authentic Sister Lúcia and the woman presented as Sister Lúcia to Pope Paul VI. And within 5 years of publishing this photographic comparison, Father Alonso was dead. His massive archive, 24 volumes, nearly 20,000 pages, including what sources describe as extensive photographic analysis, remains locked away to this day. At the Fatima Sanctuary, controlled by the diocese, under the authority that began with the Opus Dei bishop who suppressed him. That's not how you respond to a crackpot making absurd claims. That's how you respond to someone who's discovered something you desperately need to hide. Part 3. The Opus Dei Bishop, Amaral's Rise. October 3rd, 1972, Pope Paul VI appointed Father Alberto Cosme do Amaral as Bishop Aleria Fatima. Let that date sink in for a moment. Father Alonso had been official Fatima historian for 18 years. His comprehensive critical edition, commissioned by Bishop Venanzio in 1966, was nearing completion. 24 volumes, nearly 20,000 pages, more than 5,000 original documents. His photographic analysis was being compiled. And suddenly, an Opus Dei member becomes his boss. The timing is interesting. Bishop Amaral was relatively young, 50 years old. He had no prior experience as a bishop. His qualifications for overseeing the world's most significant Marian shrine were, to put it charitably, unclear. What he did have was an impeccable Opus Dei pedigree. Alberto Cosme do Amaral was the first Portuguese priest to become a member of Opus Dei. He was ordained priest on August 13, 1939. For 18 years, he had been instrumental in establishing Opus Dei's Portuguese presence, working closely with the organization's founder, Monsignor José María Escriva de Balaguer. By the time of his episcopal appointment, Amaral was one of Opus Dei's most trusted operatives in Portugal. And his appointment placed an Opus Dei member in direct control of the world's most significant Marian shrine, in direct authority over Father Alonso, in direct control of the Fatima archives. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe Paul VI looked at all the qualified candidates in Portugal and genuinely thought the best person to oversee Fatima was a relatively inexperienced priest whose primary qualification was loyalty to Opus Dei. Or maybe, just maybe, someone wanted an Opus Dei bishop in that position for a very specific reason, someone who could be counted on to do what needed to be done when Father Alonso's research became inconvenient. The Suppression, 1974. By this point, Father Alonso had spent 8 years working on the monumental critical edition commissioned by Bishop Venanzio. The volumes were complete, ready for publication. They'd been approved by a commission of Portuguese university professors. 24 volumes, nearly 20,000 pages, more than 5,000 original documents, the most comprehensive scholarly work on Fatima ever attempted. And Bishop Amaral blocked its publication. 20 years of service, 8 years of intensive work on the critical edition, impeccable scholarship, international reputation, publications in major theological journals, direct access to Sister Lúcia granted by previous bishops, commissioned by the previous bishop to create the definitive Fatima history. None of it mattered. No explanation was given. No official reason was ever published. The volumes simply weren't published. Father Alonso was ordered to turn over all materials. His comprehensive critical edition, decades of work, was locked away at the Fatima Sanctuary. His photographic analysis, the evidence he'd been compiling, disappeared into the archives under Bishop Amaral's control. Multiple researchers who had been in contact with Father Alonso about his work reported that after 1974, he became difficult to reach. Publications never appeared. When researchers inquired about Father Alonso's materials, particularly the photographic studies, they were told the collection was, quote, unavailable, end quote, or simply redirected elsewhere. Let me be absolutely clear about what this means. Bishop Amaral didn't just block publication. He confiscated Father Alonso's life's work. He made sure that 24 volumes of meticulous scholarship, nearly 20,000 pages of documentation, could not reach the public. He locked it away at the Fatima sanctuary, where it remains to this day. Imagine dedicating 20 years of your life to documenting the truth. Imagine compiling more than 5,000 original documents. Imagine preparing photographic evidence. Imagine having your work approved by university professors and ready for publication. And then imagine an Opus Dei bishop confiscating everything, locking it away, watching it disappear into archives you can no longer access. That's what they did to Father Alonso. And if that doesn't make you angry, you're not paying attention. The 1976 Tribute, Victory Lap. June 27th, 1976, exactly 1 year after the death of Joaquín María Escriva, and 2 years after suppressing Father Alonso, Bishop Amaral published an article in the diocesan newspaper, A Voz de Domingo. The piece was a glowing tribute to Escriva, the recently deceased founder of Opus Dei. Amaral gushed about the man, recounted their relationship, described Escriva's visits to Fatima. It read like a love letter. But buried in the hagiographic prose were details that revealed the architecture of what Father Alonso had been investigating. Amaral described multiple visits by Escriva to Fatima, including one, quote, in May 1967, days before the pilgrimage of the Holy Father, end quote. Think about that date, May 1967. That was when Pope Paul VI met with Sister Lúcia. The meeting that produced the photographs Father Alonso compared on page 91, the photograph showing a woman with different facial features than the authentic Sister Lúcia. And Escriva was there just days before, coordinating, preparing, making sure everyone was on the same page. Amaral wrote as an eyewitness, describing Escriva's 1967 pilgrimage. Quote, I could see him moved walking barefoot, the last stage of his pilgrimage, praying the Holy Rosary with recollection. End quote. How touching, how pious, how convenient that Amaral was there to witness these displays of devotion, building the relationship that would later position him to suppress Father Alonso. The article portrayed Amaral and Escriva as having a close personal relationship spanning decades. This wasn't a neutral bishop. This was a devoted follower celebrating his spiritual father and signaling to those who understood, Opus Dei now controls Fatima. Coming just 2 years after the suppression of Father Alonso, and the same year Father Alonso published page 91 in La Verdad sobre el Secreto de Fatima. The article read like a victory statement. The honest historian had been silenced. The evidence had been knocked away at the sanctuary. And Opus Dei's version of Fatima history would prevail. The arrogance of it is breathtaking. Amaral wasn't even trying to hide it. he was celebrating. Part 4. The Fabricated Endorsement. The Sister Lúcia Story. To understand why Father Alonso's photographic evidence was so dangerous to Opus Dei, we need to examine the organization's foundational claim about its relationship with Sister Lúcia. According to Opus Dei's official narrative, still promoted on their website, still repeated by credulous sources, Sister Lúcia personally invited Joaquín María Alonso to establish Opus Dei in Portugal. The story has become central to Opus Dei's Portuguese identity and its claimed connection to Fatima. The narrative goes like this. In February 1945, Sister Lúcia, then a Dorothean religious living in Tuy, Spain, requested a meeting with Escriva. During their conversation, she, quote, admirably understood the spirit of Opus Dei, end quote, and urged him to establish the organization in Portugal. She even allegedly intervened to help secure the necessary visas for his entry into the country. Moved by her encouragement, Escriva made his first pilgrimage to Fatima and began Opus Dei's Portuguese operations. The first center opened in Coimbra on February 5, 1946. It's a compelling story. Divine Providence, the greatest mystic of the 20th century, recognizing and endorsing one of the Church's most influential new movements. Sister Lúcia, seer of Fatima, giving her blessing to Opus Dei. There's just one problem. It's almost certainly a lie, and I'm going to show you exactly why. The impossible interventions. The first crack in the narrative appears in the claim that Sister Lúcia, quote, intervened to help secure the necessary visas, end quote, for Escriva's entry into Portugal. This assertion doesn't just strain credulity, it defies basic logic. In 1945, Sister Lúcia was a cloistered religious living in Tuy, Spain. She had no diplomatic connections, no government authority, no ability to influence Portuguese immigration policy, particularly from a convent in a different country. Think about this for a moment. How exactly does a cloistered nun in Spain intervene to get Portuguese government visas? Does she write a letter to Prime Minister Antonio Salazar? Does she call up the Portuguese embassy? Does she have secret diplomatic channels we don't know about? It's absurd. Completely, transparently absurd. Portugal's Estado Novo regime under Antonio Salazar was friendly to the Catholic Church. Vatican officials and prominent clergy could obtain entry permits through normal ecclesiastical and diplomatic channels. The claim that Escriva needed a nun in Spain to intervene for Portuguese visas is ridiculous on its face. But Opus Dei keeps telling the story anyway. Why? Because the story serves one purpose: to portray Sister Lúcia as an active facilitator of Opus Dei, not merely a passive endorser, but an eager participant in bringing them to Portugal. It's propaganda, and not even particularly clever propaganda. The incompatible spiritualities. An even greater problem is theological. The real Sister Lúcia's spirituality, as documented in authenticated writings and interviews through 1957, was fundamentally incompatible with Opus Dei's vision. Let me put this plainly. Sister Lúcia and Opus Dei taught opposite messages. Sister Lúcia's message emphasized penance and sacrifice for the conversion of sinners, the apocalyptic urgency of Russia's conversion, traditional devotional practices, the Rosary, First Saturday devotions. warnings about diabolical infiltration of the church, the catastrophic consequences of ignoring heaven's warnings. Her entire spirituality was oriented toward separation from the world, penance, sacrifice, and preparation for coming chastisements. Now contrast that with Opus Dei's spirituality. Quote, sanctification in ordinary work, end quote. Professional excellence as a path to holiness, full engagement with secular society, optimistic integration with the modern world, making the temporal order more Christian through lay engagement. These aren't just different emphases. They represent opposite theological orientations toward the world and the Church's mission within it. The idea that Sister Lúcia, who in her final authenticated interview in December 1957 warned that, quote, the devil is in the mood for engaging in a decisive battle against the Blessed Virgin, end quote, and that consecrated religious were being particularly targeted, would then, quote, admirably understand, end quote, and promote an organization devoted to sanctifying worldly professions. It's theologically incoherent. It makes no sense, unless you assume Sister Lúcia was completely inconsistent or suffering from spiritual schizophrenia, or just didn't understand her own message. Or, here's a thought, unless the Sister Lúcia who endorsed Opus Dei wasn't the real Sister Lúcia at all. The Coimbra coincidence. Perhaps the most damning evidence of premeditation appears in a detail Opus Dei proudly advertises: the location of their first Portuguese center. On February 5, 1946, Opus Dei opened its first establishment in Portugal. Not in Lisbon, the nation's capital and largest city, not in Porto, the major commercial center, but in Coimbra, a mid-sized university town with no obvious strategic importance for a new religious organization. Interesting choice, right? Why Coimbra? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. 2 years later, in 1948, Sister Lúcia was transferred from her Dorothean convent in Spain to the Carmelite monastery in Coimbra. Wait, let me make sure you caught that. Opus Dei establishes in Coimbra in 1946. Sister Lúcia is transferred to Coimbra in 1948. 2 years. They were positioned in Coimbra 2 years before Sister Lúcia arrived there. The official explanation for Sister Lúcia's transfer was her desire for stricter enclosure, but the transfer was orchestrated at the highest levels of the Vatican with direct involvement from Monsignor Giovanni Battista Montini, the future Pope Paul VI, who would later meet with the woman Father Alonso's page 91 photograph suggests was not the authentic visionary. So here's the question nobody wants to ask. How did Opus Dei know in 1946 that Sister Lúcia would be transferred to Coimbra in 1948? There are only two possibilities. 1. It was an incredible coincidence that Opus Dei just happened to choose the exact city where the Fatima Visionary would be moved 2 years later. Or 2. The transfer was already being planned at the Vatican level, and Opus Dei was positioned in advance to control access to the Visionary. Given that Opus Dei had high-level Vatican connections, given that Montini was involved in the transfer, given that Opus Dei later claimed an intimate relationship with Sister Lúcia, given that an Opus Dei bishop later suppressed photographic evidence of discrepancies, which explanation seems more likely? When Sister Lúcia arrived in Coimbra in 1948, Opus Dei was already established in the city, already positioned, already ready to monitor her activities, control access to her, and eventually, when the real visionary became too dangerous after the Fuentes interview, facilitate or conceal whatever happened next. This wasn't providence. This was planning. The post-1958 relationship. According to Opus Dei sources, Escriva visited Sister Lúcia, quote, on various occasions, end quote, at the Carmelite convent in Coimbra. One such visit is specifically documented, May 1967. Described by Bishop Amaral as occurring, quote, days before the pilgrimage of the Holy Father, end quote. This detail is crucial, absolutely crucial. Pope Paul VI visited Fatima on May 13, 1967. He met with Sister Lúcia in what became one of the most photographed encounters in Fatima history. Those photographs, the ones Father Alonso compared on page 91 of La Verdad sobre el Secreto de Fatima, show a woman with different facial features from authenticated images of Sister Lúcia from the 1940s. The differences are so obvious that even non-experts notice them when shown the images side by side. If Escriva visited Sister Lúcia in May 1967, 9 years after the Fuentes interview, 9 years after the date Father Alonso's evidence suggests something changed, then what was he actually seeing? The question becomes unavoidable. If the woman in Coimbra after 1958 had different physical features than the authenticated Sister Lúcia, and if Escriva had met the real Sister Lúcia in the 1940s, as Opus Dei claims, then he would have recognized the difference. His silence would make him complicit. Alternatively, if Escriva never actually met the real Sister Lúcia in the 1940s, if those early meetings were fabricated or greatly embellished, then his entire relationship with Sister Lúcia consisted of meetings with someone whose endorsements Opus Dei then fraudulently claimed as coming from the authentic Fatima visionary. Either way, either Escriva knew he was meeting someone with different physical features than the authentic visionary and stayed silent, or Opus Dei fabricated his entire relationship of the real Sister Lúcia. The organization's foundational claim about Sister Lúcia's endorsement is built on fraud. Part 5. The Double Cross. Father Alonso's impossible position. By the early 1970s, Father Alonso faced an investigative dilemma that would ultimately destroy him. As official Fatima historian, commissioned by Bishop Venancio to create a comprehensive critical edition, he had a sacred duty to document the truth. That was his job. That was his vocation. That was what the Church had tasked him to do. His photographic analysis pointed to conclusions that were ecclesiastically radioactive. But Opus Dei's entire Portuguese operation, including its spiritual legitimacy and its control of Fatima itself, rested on the claim that the authentic Sister Lúcia had personally invited and repeatedly endorsed the organization. Do you see the problem Father Alonso faced? If he published his complete photographic evidence, the discrepancies would be undeniable. Any endorsements given by the woman in the photographs would be called into question. Opus Dei's claim that Sister Lúcia's blessing would collapse. The organization's Portuguese legitimacy would be destroyed. Questions would arise about who knew what and when. The entire house of cards would come tumbling down. Father Alonso was preparing to publish findings that would undermine one of the Church's most powerful and politically connected organizations, an organization that had members in high positions throughout the Vatican, an organization that, as of 1972, now controlled the very diocese and sanctuary where Father Alonso worked. But Father Alonso was more afraid of God's judgment than of Opus Dei's power. He was preparing to tell the truth, and they destroyed him for it. The Vatican betrayal. The final betrayal, the one that should disturb every Catholic who cares about truth, came not from Opus Dei directly, but from the Vatican officials who should have protected an honest historian doing his job. Father Alonso was commissioned by Bishop Venancio to create the definitive critical history of Fatima. He worked under the assumption that the Vatican itself valued historical truth about the apparitions. He had been granted extraordinary access because Church authorities ostensibly wanted the most rigorous possible documentation. That assumption was catastrophically wrong. When Opus Dei's Bishop Amaral suppressed Father Alonso's work in 1974, no Vatican official intervened. No Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith demanded to see his evidence. No papal inquiry asked why a historian, commissioned to create a comprehensive critical edition, had been suddenly silenced and his 24 volumes locked away. Think about that. The official Fatima historian, commissioned by the previous bishop, given unprecedented access and authority, publishes photographic evidence of fundamental discrepancies involving the most famous visionary of the 20th century. And the Vatican's response is silence. Complete silence. Not curiosity, not investigation, not even a cursory, let's look at what he found. Just silence, and the quiet burial of nearly 20,000 pages of scholarship. The message was clear. Father Alonso had become inconvenient, and inconvenient truths about Fatima were not welcome. Truth was less important than preserving the official narrative. An honest priest's life work was less important than protecting powerful interests. The 7 Silent Years. From 1974 until his death in 1981, Father Alonso lived in what researchers have described as internal exile. He was not formally punished or laicized. Such dramatic action might have drawn attention to what he knew. Instead, he was simply made irrelevant. Erased. 'Erased, 'disappeared, 'while still alive. 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 'While His archive was locked away at the Fatima sanctuary. Researchers who tried to contact him found communication difficult, promised publications never appeared. The scholarly community that had respected his work for decades gradually lost touch with him. But Father Alonso kept working, despite the suppression, despite knowing his comprehensive critical edition would never see publication. He continued writing papers and studies, making known the essence of his findings however he could, including publishing La Verdad sobre el Secreto de Fatima in 1976, with page 91's photographic comparison that speaks volumes even now. When he died, there was no major obituary, no celebration of his scholarly contributions, no Vatican acknowledgement of his 20 years as Fatima's official historian, no recognition of his decades of service to the Church and to historical truth. It was as if he had never existed. As if those 20 years of meticulous scholarship meant nothing. As if 24 volumes, nearly 20,000 pages, more than 5,000 original documents could simply be memory hold, and everyone would forget he'd ever been Fatima's official historian. And the photographic evidence he had compiled, the comparative analysis that culminated in page 91 of La Verdad sobre el Secreto de Fatima, the documentation that raised devastating questions, remained buried in the sanctuary archives. Controlled by the diocese, under the authority that began with the Opus Dei bishop who had suppressed him, where it remains to this day. In the 1990s, the diocese finally allowed publication of 2 volumes from Father Alonso's massive critical edition. 2 volumes out of 24. And those 2 volumes were heavily redacted before publication. 22 volumes, approximately 17,000 pages of documentation remain buried, hidden, inaccessible to researchers, kept from the Catholic faithful who have a right to see them. Father Alonso gave 20 years of his life to documenting the truth about Fatima. He compiled more than 5,000 original documents. He prepared photographic evidence that raised questions so dangerous they had to be suppressed. He published what he could before they silenced him completely. He was destroyed for it. His work was buried. His evidence was locked away, and he died knowing that most of what he had discovered would remain hidden, at least for a time. If that doesn't make you angry, if that doesn't fill you with a righteous rage at what was done to an honest priest in pursuit of truth, then I don't know what will. Conclusion. The questions that remain. What did they bury? The 1974 suppression of Father Joaquín Alonso remains one of the most troubling episodes in modern church history. Not just troubling, outrageous, criminal, if we're being honest.